Chomsky, removal of troops from Afghanistan that on September 11th, 2021, that Biden's talking about, which at least the press is saying was done against the recommendations of military leaders. What do you make of that?
Well, my view infuriates most of my friends. I think before undertaking precipitous withdrawal, we should take into account the opinion of Afghans.
Wow.
We invaded in 2001 against the strong opposition of the major Afghan resistance movements. They were bitterly opposed to the invasion. The leading figure, Abdul Haq, later killed, most respected, sharply condemned the Bush's invasion. He said it's going to kill plenty of Afghans. You're doing it without any concern for Afghans. You want to show your muscle, make sure everybody's afraid of you. It's going to undermine our efforts to overthrow the Taliban from within, which is what we're slowly achieving. But you just want to show your muscle. It was a brutal, murderous invasion, had a devastating effect on Afghanistan. They want to get rid of Al-Qaeda, small police action, probably with the cooperation of the Taliban would have worked. The Taliban wanted to get rid of them. That would have done it. But that way you don't show your muscle and frighten everybody. All right, Afghans turned into a wreck. It was a wreck before, worse wreck now. There's something that happened in the late 80s, which you're not allowed to talk about. In the late 80s, the Russians were, which was a murderous invasion.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were sort of finally getting their act together. Late 80s, there was considerable progress. And this is reported by very credible figures like the UN rapporteur for women in Afghanistan, a very distinguished international feminist figure, was talking about how much the situation's improved for women. The main problem that young women were facing in Kabul was the US-backed Islamic terrorist fanatics who were throwing acid in their face when they wore the wrong clothes. Well, under tremendous US pressure, the Russians just pulled out. There was a fairly popular government, Najibullah government, probably the most popular in the history of the country. It did manage to hold out for a couple of years under the Russians stopped any support. The US was continuing to support the jihadi maniacs who were tearing the place to shreds. And finally it fell apart. Jihadis took over. They were so murderous that when the Taliban came in, the population mostly welcomed it. Do we want to duplicate that experience? I think we should think a little instead of following formulas. I'm talking to the left too. It came in, smashed the place up, should never have invaded in the first place. It was obvious at once. And now, are you going to allow some hope that Afghan peace forces, which do exist, will have some role in working out something that might be less destructive than a Taliban takeover, which is what's going to happen? Well, I think that's worth thinking about.
And to be clear, what you're arguing, that I think, if I understand you correctly, you're arguing that a precipitous or symbolic withdrawal with no necessary immediate rationale except for the date, without thinking of the consequences, is inappropriate. So you're saying that one should think about a withdrawal that works in accordance with the Afghan peacekeeping forces themselves? Is that what you're arguing?
We should take into account the opinion of Afghans. And they're not just objects.
Yeah, okay. But what are their opinions? What right now?
Well, there are Afghan peace forces, which they're not strong, shouldn't exaggerate, but they exist. And they're trying to work out some kind of maybe local accommodations or something or other. give them any kind of support we can. Now, actually, this pullout is not a pullout. What it means is you get American troops out of Afghanistan, replace them with mercenaries called contractors, South African killers, and so on and so forth. That's what's happening in much of the world. And keep bombing the shit out of everybody. Okay, that's withdrawal. Now, I should say, people who say we have to end our forever wars, what are they talking about? First of all, we've been at war forever, ever since 1783, so it's not a forever war. But it means we've got to do it for our benefit, because we don't want to spend any more money and time on it. We've labored to help the Afghans. Didn't work. Now we're going to get out. This has nothing to do with reality. I mean, that if we should be getting out, it's for their benefit, not for our benefit.
Absolutely. You've talked about the peace Afghan forces. Do you have any optimism that that if we listen to the Afghan public and acted accordingly, that that broken country might actually resolve itself?
Well, let's look back at the Russians. At the time when they were pulling out, at the time of the Najibullah government, it was predicted by everyone they'll just be overthrown in no time. Well, they hung on for a couple of years, even though they were under sharp attack by a major military force backed by the United States, and they were getting no support. Well, that suggests something. If we could get a government that's acceptable to some sector of Afghans, if it could work maybe at local accommodations, other arrangements, maybe work something out, maybe there's a possibility. It's a long shot.
It's a long shot.
But we can't disregard it, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, okay, given it's a long shot, what do you we can have a discussion later on about this. I don't know whether you want to make a prediction. What's the prediction, assuming this quote unquote pullout happens September 11th? What do you predict for the next year or two or three?
Don't claim any expertise in this, but from all the information that seems to be available, the Taliban will take over. The Afghan army will just collapse the way the Iraqi army did as soon as a couple of people started coming in pickup trucks and aiming guns at them. They just ran away. That's the US created army. I doubt that it'll be any different in Afghanistan. Try to create an army the way we created, it's not going to be an army. So I presume they'll flee, collapse, hand over their guns, something or other. Pretty soon the Taliban will take over. It's a pretty ugly regime. We've seen it.
Do you think that, well, that's the other thing I was going to ask. You don't think there's been any change to the Taliban? You think once they take over, it reverts back to what it was before?
Well, there are reports that there are changes. I don't know. I think you really have to be on the ground to know that.
Yeah.
You know that the so-called expert analysts have mostly been totally wrong.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's that not. Yeah, it's certainly not an optimistic situation in any way, and the likelihood of the interesting thing is, I mean, of course, trying to go beyond the U.S. media in any way is sometimes difficult. But the reason I asked you is what the Afghan people want is that I can't find sources. Well, not as to be fair, I haven't worked very hard to find them, or hard enough, but I really have no idea of what the Afghan people want at this point, based on anything I read.
I don't think anybody does. First of all, if you take polls, they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take polls to a population that's terrified,
yeah,
what does it mean? They'll tell you what you want to hear.